Okay, I made a video titled 12 Straw Men that I see continually. Let me get the 12 straw man arguments used against the church / Christianity, and I've seen all of these. So I just went through them. And then it still says there are comments waiting for approval. I thought I approved all of them. It's a fair list. This is what Talk to Me About Life posted 3 days ago. It's a fair list. I don't think I've ever really used any of these in my discussion. Well, good for you. Appreciate that. And these aren't why I left Christianity, but totally think they get used by some atheists. Yes, they do. However, there are a couple I want to poke a little at here. Number 3, I think while strictly speaking, this is a bit of a straw man, it does not go to the issue many Christians use as evidence of God, which is morality. So the counter argument goes, shouldn't we expect morals given by God at one time to be the same as another, or does God change his mind about what is moral? For the reason might a God change his mind about what is moral? Well, if we look at the Ten Commandments, take 10 Commandments. Moses received 2 tablets, and on them were 10 symbols that stood for 10 letters, that stood for 10 ideas, and that's where we get the 10 Commandments from. And then he extrapolated from that the Mosaic Law, as well as the scribes later on extrapolating from these 10 symbols, or these 10 Commandments, as well as Mosaic Law, to form the bulk of Levitical law. So yeah, the application of these 10 eternal truths do get applied differently across civilizations. Number 5, strictly speaking, you're right. However, the issue is to what extent should these what extent we should trust the biblical texts in order to establish that not only we think that they're possibly true, not just likely true, but certainly true. We know things have changed in the text, passages added. I'll stop you right there. The oldest manuscript evidence we have is P52, which dates from around AD 110. That's from the Gospel of John. It's about the size of a credit card and has writing on both sides, and it matches a modern Greek text to a T. And the only variants we ever find are variants like to, I'll give you an English example. Somebody writes to, T-O-O, and another scribe writes also. Now, how do you translate that differently? You don't. And we can see the lines of translation because we have over 6,000 Greek manuscripts. We have tens of thousands of Latin manuscripts. We have thousands of Syriac manuscripts. We have thousands of Ethiopic manuscripts, thousands of Slavonic manuscripts. Over the centuries, there's no possible way that there is one person in charge that could change all of these. Not to mention that many of them were just recently pulled out of the sands of the Middle East. So who's doing the changing? And anytime people thought there was a change, you can see the correction in there, like Sinaiticus, for example, or Vaticanus. We know things have been changed and texts and passages added. There's only one, and that's the woman caught in adultery, and it was originally in Luke, and they moved it to John early on because it just didn't fit the flow. That's it. It wasn't invented. We also know, we can see in extant manuscripts or any text that as time goes on, the text of a book becomes more locked in. Not so. So those texts, we know nothing for what the first decades, or at least between them, when they were alleged to have been authored, and the earliest complete attestation. However, we can be sure that the text at one point is complete and accurate. What? You realize we have the early church fathers who are writing before, okay, the New Testament was canonized, let's say. The first person to write a list of the books of the New Testament that we have today is in the 39th Paschal letter of Atheist of Alexandria, which he wrote in AD 367. Not long after that, in 410, at the Second Council of Carthage, these same books are laid down, although there were many lists of New Testament books of what should be in there. The Shepherd of Hermas, the Didache, the First Clement, the Apocalypse of Peter, 2nd Peter, 2nd, 3rd John were not wanted, but they made it in anyways. And then we have, that's just in the West. In the East, it's much different. I mean, there's still 3rd letter to the Corinthians. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has many more books. We won't read the Apocalypse of John in our services. But we have people writing in the 1st century, Christians writing in the 1st century, quoting huge chunks of these books of the Bible. If you look at Irenaeus of Lyon, he's not the 1st century, but he mentions the 4 Gospel by name and content. So it seems like you don't quite know how the canon was formed or what evidence we do have for Scripture. For those were texts we know nothing about for the first few decades when they were alleged to have been authored. In the earliest complete attestation, how can we be sure that the text at this point is complete and accurate? Well, by the 2nd century, we're pulling out whole manuscripts. Not to mention that even if everything had, holes in it, stretching from India to Ireland, as well as all of the church fathers, you can reconstruct the entirety of the New Testament quite easily. If we only had the first 3 centuries of the church fathers writing to each other, we'd have the entirety of the New Testament. We don't even need a scrap of the stuff that comes out of the ground, but yet we find codices like Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. So no, and what do you think? These little notes where it says LXX, or it says this does not. Earlier manuscripts have this appear in them, or this does not appear in later manuscripts. Actually, if you look at the ending of Mark, because the oldest manuscript that we have, the end part of it is rotted away. And it tells you, it says, look, this doesn't appear in the earliest manuscript that we have. It's strikingly honest. I mean, you'll see this all the time. These footnotes, LXX will stand for Septuagint. SYC is the Syriac text. I mean, it's just brimming with notes. Yeah, see. Yep. I mean, all you have to do is go through the bottom of this, especially if you have a study Bible. I mean, if you ever looked at a Nessie Allen, I believe the new edition of the Nessie Allen has come out. How can we be sure at this point it's completely accurate? I just told you. How do we know sections weren't added or subtracted to or from or harmonized? Well, there was a harmonized gospel by Tatian, and then there was a second one that was done. Harmonizing of the 4 Gospels was very popular in Syria. or subject of different kinds, editorial license. Well, editorial license, what do you mean? Surely, if somebody took editorial license, someone from India to Ireland, from Russia to Ethiopia would notice real quick. And that would get tossed out. It is even accurate to talk about authorial act by one author. No. By one, what do you mean by one author? Scribe? Remember, these things were getting, it was illegal, so these things were getting churned out all over the place because they were being burned so quickly. Why is the book of Kells and the works that are in India, pre-colonial India? I'm talking about pre-Islamic India. We have gospels from there, or Ethiopia from the 500s, or very early Latin manuscripts, or like P52, which might be, I mean, they date it to about 110, 110, but it might actually be from inside the first century. And there's plenty of second century manuscripts. Not to mention the writings of the church fathers that are quoting stuff out of the New Testament continually. 10. Besides the point of whether Christianity is subjectively true, is still a true statement. A large part of early church did in fact believe in the young earth. Wrong! Have you not read Clement of Alexandria? Have you not read Basil the Great? Absolutely incorrect. Absolutely wrong. It's as if you know nothing about early Christianity. Origen, who wound being a heretic, but whatever, his teacher, Clement of Alexandria, soundly rejected young earth creationism as a foolish notion. And Basil the Great, that title Great, it was actually Basil of Caesarea. We call him the Great because he was not wrong. So those are two extremely heavy hitters in the early church. And they would be shocked to hear you say this. Again, it doesn't seem like you know anything about manuscript evidence or the early church or what we have as evidence. I'm not trying to be mean to you, but it's shocking. Now, of course, the Bible isn't solely to blame for this. The lack of understanding of geology contributed. No, the Bible is not to blame for this. It's the Protestants. Remember, the Big Bang. The atheists of the 20th century hated the Big Bang because Hoyle himself, who coined the term Big Bang against Lemaitre, the man who discovered the Big Bang, said this is just a ploy to prove God. Because if the Big Bang is true, then Genesis is true. And Hoyle did say that. That's why he tried to slander it by calling it the Big Bang. George Lemaitre was a Catholic priest. So no, this is wrong. Young Earth creationism was started as a reaction by stupid hillbilly Protestants that saw the Big Bang as a Catholic invention. And they believe all Catholics are in league with all atheists and Freemasons. So, no. 11. This is an interesting position to take. If I can ask, if Christianity does not come from the Bible, where does it come from? Does it look different from Christianity that comes from the Bible? What is your Christianity look like if the Bible had never existed? It would look exactly the same. We don't have the Bible for the first 4 centuries, or the New Testament, the compilation of the texts for the first 4 centuries. You can't pick up a Bible and get Christianity from it. right? You can create a cult, like is what happened in America with its 40,000 different denominations. But the Bible comes from Christianity. Christianity does not come from the Bible. And if we were to take out half of the books in the New Testament, Christianity wouldn't look any different. It is baptism and the Eucharist and liturgical worship. In fact, for the majority of the existence of the Christian religion, most people couldn't read. In fact, in the Latin West, the heretical Latin West, it was against the law to read the Bible. Did you not know this? That's why the Gutenberg printing press was such a revolutionary thing, that people could finally read their Bible.